Welcome. My name is Kevin Averick, and I'm honored to be the Dean of the School for Conflict Analysis and Resolution at George Mason University. This school is the first of its kind. In 1981, we offered the first postgraduate degree in conflict resolution in the world, and in 1988, the first PhD, and in 2004, the first baccalaureate degree. We wanted to make sure we had the field right before we tried it on 18 and 19-year-olds. And we did, for the most part. The mission of the school can be put quite simply. It is to understand the causes, the roots, the sources of deeply rooted, protracted, and destructive conflict, particularly conflict that has as its component, as its sequela, violence, and to interrupt those cycles of violence. We operate with three pillars. One is, as a university program, we are researchers, and we are learners. As a university program, we are teachers, although I have to say in my 36 years in the program, we have often learned as much from our students as we have taught them. So research and learning and teaching and practice. And one of the things that distinguishes our program as a university-based program is that far from being ensconced away from the world in the proverbial ivory tower, we, my colleagues on the faculty, our students, and our alumni are also involved in the world through active practice. For us, the model is the scholar practitioner. We have a very strong international presence, often through the work of our more than 1,600 alumni, many of whom come to us from conflict-saturated areas and return there to do work. Increasingly, many of our students are coming from conflict-saturated areas here in the United States and staying here to do the work that needs to be done. Tonight, we're honored to welcome Her Excellency, the President of Malta, to deliver the 28th Lynch Lecture. This was a lecture that was endowed by and named in honor of Edwin and Helen Lynch, two remarkable citizens of the Commonwealth of Virginia who so believed in us in the 1980s, the early 1980s, that they supported us in many, many ways. One of the ways was to endow the Lynch Professorship. Another way was to gift us 120 beautiful acres in Belmont Bay, in Lorton, Virginia, on which we have, with their funds and with the support of friends of SCAR and some public support, to build a state-of-the-art retreat and conference center. They had named the land Point of View, and it is in a way such a perfect name for it that we have kept that, because in many ways what we are about in the world is to bring different points of view together. In my own thinking, Point of View can become truly a civilian Camp David, where people deeply divided can come together in dialogue in a beautiful setting with skilled facilitators and with a serious commitment not to rain destruction upon themselves or their peoples or other peoples, come together and think through the conflicts. I can think of no better way to give you a sense of the sources of the Lynch Professorship and the Lynch point of view and the Lynch Lecture than to read the words of Edwin Lynch when he received the George Mason Medal in 1995. And these are words that are inscribed on a plaque at Point of View. He told the folks who were gathered at a commencement when he got the medal, "We often hear," he said, "that there are no frontiers left for our young people to explore. I must take exception with that comment. Our scientists say we have not learned to use our minds beyond a fraction of their capabilities. We must seek to develop and use our minds, not to conquer one another, but to peacefully and constructively solve the conflicts that cause so much of the world's grief. It is this frontier of the human mind that I challenge each of you here today to explore." Those are perfect words to describe what it is we at SCAR do, what it is we've been doing for 35 years and what we hope to do well into the future. With these words, I'd like to introduce to you my friend and colleague, Professor Susan Hirsch, who is the new holder of the Lynch Chair. This is her inaugural event. It'll be a hard act to follow, Susan. And I want to welcome Susan to the podium now. Professor Hirsch.
Thank you, Kevin. Your Excellency, distinguished guests in the Malta delegation, my family members, colleagues and friends, students and former students, audience members, welcome. I'm so glad that you've come out to join us this evening. Tonight we will hear the 28th annual Lynch Lecture. For me, as Kevin mentioned, it's the first Lynch Lecture that I've had the pleasure of arranging, and it really has been a great pleasure. In my organizational capacity, though, right at this moment, let me inform you of a couple of things. One, tonight's lecture is being recorded. It will be available after probably a couple of weeks. We're also live tweeting tonight's event. #Lynch Lecture. For those of you who would like to do that, please feel free to tweet, but maybe silence your cell phones. That's my last logistical message. I'm really honored to have been named Lynch Chair. In recent years, faculty who hold chairs at SCAR have used their position to raise the profile of topics important to them. Some of these have been narrative, religion and diplomacy, gender and conflict. My aim as Lynch Chair is to raise the profile of justice. That's my theme, justice. Transitional justice, restorative justice are obvious topics for the conflict field, but my activities will also emphasize social justice roots. The roots of the conflict field are, one way to trace them is certainly through social justice. And I think that social justice is also the future of the conflict field. I hope to support colleagues' work on inequality, structural violence, nonviolent resistance, and restorative processes under that rubric of justice. So stay tuned for more on that in the months to come. My predecessor as Lynch Chair, Professor Emeritus Sandy Sheldon, who's here tonight, provides a wonderful example of how to advance an agenda of change and to do so with incredible grace. So I want to just publicly thank Sandy for putting SCAR on the map as a place for studying gender and conflict, and for being such a terrific Lynch Chair, colleague, and friend. Maybe we could give her a hand. Tonight's topic, excuse me, promises to highlight both gender, as Sandy emphasized, and justice, as I've committed to doing. We are likely to hear about the extraordinary story of Malta as it has become a leader in efforts toward justice and rights in a variety of areas, but especially with respect to gender, sexuality, and identity. For those of you who may not know, our school has long-standing connections to the Republic of Malta. Dean Averick taught Mason study abroad in Malta some years ago. Professor Richard Rubenstein deepened those initial ties and was instrumental in establishing the dual degree program that we offer jointly with the University of Malta. Many faculty here tonight have taught in our Malta program, and we have close to 100 alumni with a dual degree, some of whom are in the audience. I'm very happy to see you here tonight. I can say for myself that I was very excited when a female president came to power in Malta in 2014. I and several ESCAR faculty have had the great good fortune to participate in activities of the President's Foundation for the Well-Being of Society. Under Her Excellency, Marie-Louise Coleiro Preca, President of Malta, and Director General Dr. Ruth Farrugia, the Foundation's agenda for research and intervention is broad and admirable. Topics include improving childhood experiences, fostering environmental sustainability, supporting families in all the forms they take, reducing conflict in communities, and fighting addiction with compassion, among other endeavors. President's Foundation programs promote peace and have touched the lives of many people in Malta and beyond. I am enormously pleased that Her Excellency has agreed to speak to us tonight, and I thank her personally for making the time. I'm humbled and inspired by her strength, compassion, and progressive thinking. She stands as an exemplary leader at a time when good leadership is needed across the world. I turn now to Dr. Michelle Marks, George Mason University's Vice President for Academic Innovation and New Ventures, who will introduce Her Excellency, the President of Malta.
Thank you, Susan. I want to extend a warm welcome from George Mason University. This is a great evening and a very special evening for George Mason University. First, I want to take a moment to appreciate the vitally important mission, the School of Conflict Analysis and Resolution. The mission, its leadership, and frankly, the impact that you are having on the world. The world needs more scholars and more citizens that are devoted to lessening the destructive conflict and to the mission of promoting peace and justice and equity in the world, more than ever before, frankly. ESCAR's longstanding relationship with the University of Malta is a source of pride for the university, and frankly, a great example of George Mason University's dedication to educating global scholars. Second, I want to recognize the Lynch Chair, Professor Susan Hirsch, for making tonight a reality for all of us. I've had the chance to get to know you over the last several years and have a great appreciation for you as a scholar with a deep-rooted commitment to justice. Thank you. She has also spent considerable time at the University of Malta conducting research and teaching and developing very consequential relationships, which is how we are all brought together this evening. I'd like to introduce Your Excellency, the President of Malta. Marie-Louise Coleiro Preca took the oath of office on April 4th, 2014 as the youngest and second woman to become the President of Malta after being active in politics for 40 years, 16 of those years serving in Parliament. Within the Labour Party, she served on the National Executive as Assistant General Secretary and as General Secretary. President Coleiro Preca is the first ever and only woman who occupied this important elected position at the highest echelon of Maltese political party. When she rose to the presidency, she established a foundation to promote well-being in society, a center that aims to create safe spaces for dialogue on social well-being, bridging popular wisdom and academic research. And this is an area that's very close to heart for George Mason University. In our own strategic plan, we've identified becoming a model well-being university as critical to our future, bringing scholarship and practice together to promote a diverse society and helping it thrive. President Coleiro Preca has also established the President's Trust, which aims to encourage vulnerable young people experiencing difficulties in life, such as unemployment, being at risk in poverty or social exclusion, to improve their lives and education through training. Her Excellency has long been a champion for justice. As a young member of Parliament, at a time when there were very few women politicians, she was known for care and concern for her constituents. She has long advocated for improved education, better access to social services, and a life of dignity for even the most vulnerable in society, including the poor, the disabled, and anyone facing discrimination. She has long been a champion for the rights of children. She routinely welcomed children to play in a garden adjacent to her personal living quarters. Earlier this year, she hosted a high-level meeting that brought together 160 experts from governments and NGOs on the crisis of missing children across Europe. When she returns to Malta tomorrow, she'll be preparing for a trip to Rome, I believe on Monday, where she'll be visiting centers that house refugee children. While others in Europe and beyond Europe have advocated for building walls and pushing back boats coming from Northern Africa, Her Excellency has come to the defense of migrants who have arrived by boat in Malta, urging compassionate reception and concerted attention to integration. She's been a voice for integration and for those that have come to the island irregularly as part of the migration of people from conflict zones and areas of poverty in the global south. In her widely acclaimed speech on Republic Day in 2016, Her Excellency made the following proclamation that highlights Malta's intercontinental position and is relevant for all of us today. As the guardian of the Constitution, I believe Malta should continue hosting with love and respect all the people who live among us and visit us. Morally, we should not punish those who've spent years contributing to the prosperity of our country and being a part of our society by sending them back rather than appreciating them. We should continue living our vocation as an international bridge for intercultural dialogue and peace. On your first trip to DC as president, we are very honored and delighted to have President Coleiro Preca here at George Mason University. Tonight, she speaks to us on the topic of peace beyond the patriarchy. Welcome.
Vice President Marks, Dean Averick, Professor Susan Hash, Professor Richard Rubenstein, Professor Julie Shedd, Dr. Ruth Faroujan, Director General of the President's Foundation for the Wellbeing of Society, faculty members and families, students, dear friends. I really feel so privileged and honored to be amongst you, but also very honored to be the very first president of Malta to visit Washington, moreover, George Mason University. Let me also thank you for the overwhelming, warm welcome you gave me and my delegation. And also, let me take this opportunity to thank Professor Susan Hirsch for her kind invitation on behalf of George Mason University School for Conflict Analysis and Resolution to deliver this 28th Lynch lecture to such a distinguished audience of faculty members, students, and alumni. Let me also take this opportunity to commend the relationship between ESCA, the University of Malta, and my foundation, that is the President's Foundation for the Wellbeing of Society, and which has led to a number of fruitful collaborations. These collaborations include a successful series of public lectures which have done a lot to sensitize members of the Maltese public to important issues of conflict analysis and peace building. During this lecture, I shall share some thoughts and reflections about the importance I believe we must give to peace building, particularly from a gender perspective. I shall speak about my belief, confirmed by many of my encounters with individuals and communities from around the globe, that issues of gender and the challenge to safeguard peace are intimately and profoundly connected. For this reason, a holistic approach to gender and peace must focus on the relationship between gender and violence. For example, one of the initiatives I most recently supported and presented at the European Parliament a few months ago is a proposal that was formed during a 4-year European Union project entitled Femicide Across Europe. This initiative is an outcome from the research conducted by a network of experts and researchers who have tackled urgent issues of violence which are experienced by women across the European Union. The network specifically focused its attention on femicide, which is to say the result of the most lethal and criminal forms of violence faced by women, and the leading cause of female homicides worldwide. It is shocking to consider that there is, as yet, no European-wide, let alone international, monitoring system which looks at the particular forms of violence confronting women. The need for such a focus on femicide has even been highlighted at the United Nations in 2015, with calls for a femicide watch to be established. However, developments have unfortunately been slow. It is important to note that the World Health Organization is itself highlighting the need for increased attention to data collection in this area. Although data is still on the ground, some 35% of female homicides are perpetrated by an intimate partner. Moreover, the World Health Organization draws specific attention to the scourge of so-called honor killings, which are, and I quote, "Honor killings are among the most tragic consequences and explicit illustrations of embedded, culturally accepted discrimination against women and girls. They are often committed with impunity owing to widespread acceptance of the practice and legal and judicial statutes that protect the murderer," end quote. For this reason, earlier this year, I urged the members of the Committee on Women's Rights and Gender Equality of the European Union to respond to the grey areas in our research and our legislation by supporting the establishment of an observatory on femicide. Through such an observatory on femicide, vital data collection and analysis can take place, thereby making a serious contribution to influence legislation and policy, and thus helping to address the violence faced by women in their communities and societies. I believe that while such measures are essential, they must form part of a larger transformation within our societies. We must prioritize the visibility of all women in all situations, and we must effectively respond to the challenges that they are facing. In order to do so, we must take a look at the systemic and structural oppressions that continue to undermine the full freedoms and the rightful equality of women and gender minorities. I believe that the international community must do more to confront the underlying discrimination that is harming the dignity of so many individuals around the world. First and foremost, we must take a critical look at the sources of oppression which circulate through our nations and our international systems. I believe that the only pathway for us to achieve sustainable and meaningful well-being for women, for girls, and for gender minorities, but also for men and boys, is by courageously and openly confronting the patriarchy. The reality is that patriarchal oppressions are present throughout our societies. They are prevalent in the ways our cultural narratives are formed, in the ways they function, and in the ways they are disseminated throughout our communities. Patriarchy is a truly global challenge and will require an equally global response and solution. Patriarchy is a cultural system that we are born into, in which we all participate and which we perpetuate, often unconsciously, to the detriment of so many human beings. Patriarchy, like all forms of oppression, has a way of normalizing the abuses. It has a way of making the unacceptable injustices faced by so many women, girls, and gender minorities seem like they are parts of a socially acceptable status quo. Patriarchy makes us believe that there are no alternatives to its way of thinking, of acting, and of living. It would have us believe that a deep-rooted change is not possible. However, I believe that now, at this precarious moment in the history of our world, with so much international conflict and global confusion, we cannot afford to be complacent. We must move together in solidarity, regardless of our gender, to address all unjust systems of power. We must keep using all the platforms at our disposal to affirm that there is indeed another and a better way of living. Many of you are students, exploring the world through the opportunities of your education. Let me therefore encourage you to heighten your awareness throughout your studies and in your careers to how power circulates, often in very unjust ways, throughout society. Let me encourage you to consider what other paths we can take as individuals and as one human family on our slow journey towards a more peace-focused, gender-inclusive, and sustainable world. In order to open our minds to the limitless potential of people of all genders working together, we must challenge the one-dimensional vision of masculinity, which is upheld by the patriarchy. We cannot continue explicitly or implicitly to promote damaging and distorting attitudes. We must replace perspectives that privilege power, coercion, and control with stronger attributes, such as compassion, respectful relationship building, and the ability to nurture humanity. To achieve such a vision of our world, we must disrupt all forms of dualistic and narrowly gender thinking, especially when it comes to the roles that women and men pursue in society. Moreover, we must recognize that questioning our binary assumptions about gender and the world is essential in order to create societies that are safe and welcoming for people of all genders, of all sexual orientations, and of all identities. In this context, I am proud to say that my country, Malta, has been ranked first out of 49 observed European countries by the International Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Trans, and Intersex Association in their annual index for LGBTIQ rights. Moreover, Malta is one of the only countries in the world to have made LGBT rights equal at a constitutional level. And in 2016, Malta became the first country in the European Union to ban gay conversion pseudotherapies. All of these efforts are evidence of the importance that the Maltese give to the personal truth and to the intrinsic humanity of each and every member of our communities. All of these efforts show us that it is possible to create a fundamental change in our societies, a change which disrupts the narrow and rigid thinking exhibited by patriarchal oppressions. However, even with such examples of success, we cannot afford to rest on our laurels. As you well know, here in the United States, political will can change. Sometimes progress can be reversed with apparent ease and with disastrous effects. Therefore, what we truly need most urgently of all is a transformation within our cultures. I believe that the young people of the world must take a more central role to achieve this much-needed transformation. You must be the activists of today in order to become the effective leaders of tomorrow. Your activism is needed here and now before it is too late. The world needs a transformation that promotes solidarity through an approach which encourages collective and cross-cutting activism. We must transform our global consciousness away from destructive and coercive attitudes towards a perspective that upholds the peaceful and inclusive participation of all people, whoever they may be and wherever they may come from. Inclusive participation is possible when we are not complacent, when we take real action, and when we challenge the far-reaching effects of patriarchal oppression in our societies. We cannot ignore the fact that women, for example, are still suffering from various forms of economic inequality due to the gender pay gap. The gender pay gap exists across our nations and continues to restrict women's access to equitable and equal opportunities for employment. According to the World Economic Forum's latest report on the gender pay gap, and I quote, "More than a decade of data has revealed that progress is still too slow for realizing the full potential of one half of humanity within our lifetimes," end quote. Nor can we ignore the fact that careers which are historically associated with women, such as education and the caring professions, have a disproportionately lower salary. We must also take note of important indicators from the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap report, which says that it will take 170 years for us to achieve economic gender equality. Furthermore, the report suggests a strong relationship between gender parity and gross national income. Quoting once again from this report, there is a growing body of research and evidence strongly suggesting that gender parity can become a key driver of prosperity and national income growth. Therefore, achieving gender equality and equity in the world of work for people of all genders is just as essential for the health of our economies as it is essential for the social and political freedom of all members of our human family. For this reason, we must also address the fact that men often occupy the vast majority of visible roles of influence within political and economic sectors. According to data from a report entitled Women on Boards, released by Morgan Stanley Capital International, among the 4,218 companies covered by their analysis, women held 15% of all directorships, with Norway 40.1%, Sweden 33.7%, and France 33.5%, reflecting the highest percentages of women as board members. Moreover, the report indicates that companies with strong female leadership generated a return on equity of 10.1% per year versus the 7.4% for those without, while also exhibiting fewer instances of governance-related challenges. In the world of politics, according to last year's indicators from United Nations Women, only 22.8% of all national parliaments were women, and globally, there are 38 countries in which women account for less than 10% of parliamentarians. Moreover, women who hold such positions are expected, and in some ways, they are forced to subscribe to patriarchal norms in order to be successful. The inclusion of women in positions of authority and governance is essential if we are serious about valuing the voices of people of all genders. In order to end patriarchal oppressions, we also need to find innovative ways to deal with the conflicts which patriarchy produces and promotes within and across our societies. We need to face the facts and address worrying indicators which tell us that while the United Nations Security Council's resolution number 1325 recognized that war impacts women differently and women's participation is vital to peace talks, between 1992 and 2011, only 9% of peace negotiators were women. Moreover, only 2% were chief mediators, and only 4% were witnesses or signatories. All of this must be acknowledged against the backdrop of a pioneering study by Laurel Stone conducted in 2015 and entitled A Quantitative Analysis of Women's Participation in Peace Processes. The study states that when and where women are included in peace processes, there is a 20% increase in the probability of peace agreements lasting at least 2 years, and a 35% increase in the probability of peace agreements lasting 15 years. For this reason, I believe that we must introduce a self-reflective and constructive political approach which makes the effects of patriarchy visible and triggers a more substantial, meaningful, and sustainable change, thereby promoting the inclusion of women and gender minorities at all levels of influence. In this way, we shall also initiate a sustainable process of healing within our communities to address the ongoing effects of patriarchal oppression. Real change can only take place with a grassroots approach, using a bottom-up methodology which listens to people's genuine concerns and takes practical steps to change our attitudes and actions. Sustainable peace begins with each and every one of us. Identifying the root causes of patriarchal oppression and making them visible is therefore essential. We must appreciate that different cultures and diverse groups bring in different attitudes and approaches in the way they manifest the problems of patriarchy. For this reason, we must create safe and respectful spaces for dialogue with a broad diversity of participants. We must bring women and gender minorities on board, not only as stakeholders, but also as leaders in processes of dialogue which aim to transform conflict and sow the seeds of peace. In doing so, we shall be implementing the full force of the United Nations Agenda 2030 and its Sustainable Development Goals, in particular SDG number 5, which promotes full equality for all genders. To achieve such equality and equitable peace, I believe we must take every opportunity to end once and for all the normalization and perpetuation of patriarchal violence. We cannot go on excusing our cultural narratives which justify antisocial and damaging male behavior by saying that boys will always be boys. Not only does such an attitude endanger the health and safety of women and girls, but it also diminishes the dignity of men and boys by implying that positive change is not possible. Nor can we go on celebrating a macho culture where violent and controlling attitudes are celebrated without criticism. We must challenge the idea that aggression is part of what it means to be a real man, and that femininity should by extension, be degraded. To achieve these goals, I believe that our national, regional, and global institutions need to do more to encourage men to be vocal and to speak out against patriarchal ideas and actions. We cannot be silent partners in the work we must do to achieve the meaningful empowerment of women. Let me quote the inspiring words of feminist academic and activist, Professor Bell Hooks, when she says, "Males cannot love themselves in patriarchal culture if their very self-definition relies on submission to patriarchal rules. When men embrace feminist thinking and practice, which emphasizes the value of mutual growth and self-actualization in all relationships, their emotional well-being will be enhanced. A genuine feminist politics always brings us from bondage to freedom, from lovelessness to loving," end quote. Therefore, we are all stakeholders with so much to gain by addressing the tremendous challenges with patriarchy, normalized violence, and deep-rooted oppression are having at every level of our societies. Working together to address patriarchal oppressions will lead us to remove the barriers and the borders that constrain people of all gender identities. Working together to address patriarchal oppressions will also lead us to truly safeguard the dignity of each and every individual. Let us remember that many of the world's conflicts are the result of a patriarchal system which legitimizes the use of violence, which promotes narratives of violence, and which perpetuates the objectification of human beings, of other creatures, and of the land itself. Each and every one of us has the responsibility to make a positive change. We must be fearless and stand up to any and all perspectives which enact dangerous systems of exploitation and oppression. Let me conclude by encouraging you as educators and as students to find ways of taking practical actions to address the underlying culture and social injustices which are perpetuating violence and abuses within our societies and across our globe. As students and educators, you are well placed to promote innovative educational perspectives and bold cultural narratives which will help to end once and for all the discrimination, the inequalities, and the violence being faced by women, by girls, and by gender minorities. Most importantly of all, we must take care of one another. We must remember that this precious gift of life deserves to be treated with dignity, with respect, and with tenderness. Let us therefore work together to prioritize a zero-tolerance policy towards all forms of gender-based violence and oppression in order to promote equality and equity. In this way, I am confident that we shall be doing our best to create and to sustain a global culture of positive peace, respect, and dignity for the benefit of all humanity. Thank you.
I'd like to now invite Professor Rich Rubenstein to make some remarks.
Well, when you're asked to comment on a speech like this, one feels a little bit conflicted about it because in academic
language, comment is a euphemism for critique. And when you admire a person as much as I admire Marie-Louise Coleiro Preca, and when you know her as well as we know each other, you may begin by thinking, oh my goodness, I don't want to be in a position of commenting, critiquing her speech. But I knew to begin with that I would like this speech, and I did like it a whole lot. And so in this case, it's no problem. The comment, actually, that I would like to make involves the sorts of questions that her presentation raises for us as researchers and professors of conflict analysis and resolution. Because it seems to me that the basic situation that she has laid out in her remarks and the problems she's identified is undeniable. That patriarchy exists, that it has the deleterious effects that she discussed, that she described, doesn't seem to me to be even debatable. What to do about it is problematic, is a problem. We can begin with Marie-Louise's encouragement to recognize that the problem exists and to determine among ourselves, and especially with younger people, to do something about it, not to pretend that it doesn't exist. But particularly giving this sort of speech in the United States at the present time immediately raises some very difficult questions for us. Because we're really in the midst of a period in which the values of what Marie-Louise is calling patriarchy are being celebrated, are being affirmed in a very aggressive and determined sort of way by lots of our fellow citizens. And so we find ourselves confronted by a situation in which if you give the same talk that she just gave us so eloquently to other Americans, many of them will say to you, you know, we've really had enough of this compassion. And we've had enough of these feminine perspectives. And the result of being too soft and being too compassionate and not thinking enough about our own interests and not being aggressive in the defense of our own interests and not being tough enough and not being cruel enough is that we're being taken advantage of by other people because it's a dog-eat-dog world. And if you're not a deal maker and a ruthless deal maker, you'll get taken advantage of every time by people who are tougher than you. So all this anti-patriarchal talk is very nice, but it's not going to supply jobs for people who are without jobs. It's not going to reindustrialize, deindustrialize areas of the country. It's not going to assert American national interests, which ought to be put first and not be subordinated to anybody else's interests. And this kind of talk, as you know, is generating, I wouldn't say universal acceptance, but substantial acceptance, enough so that to simply say we're anti-patriarchal, and we want to affirm the virtues that feminist theory has put forward, is going to leave a lot of people on the other side saying, but that's the problem. So the question for us as conflict resolvers and the questions for us as justice seekers, it seems to me, is how to get over, how to get beyond this dichotomy between the the so-called feminist perspective, the soft perspective, and a zeitgeist which is now more and more aggressive and hyper-masculine and demanding America first. How do we get beyond that? Defending the values that Marie-Louise has talked about in her speech is absolutely part of that task. We don't retreat, it seems to me, from the values of anti-patriarchy. But we also seek some way, some dialectical way, if you like, to move to the next stage of development where we're affirming human values that incorporate the insights that have been given us, thank God, by feminist theory and practice, but also frame this and put this in a way that makes it possible for people to understand that their family is the human family, that embracing the feminine side of their own personalities and their own values is not to deny masculinity, but as Marie-Louise said at one point, is to actually affirm genuine masculinity. And as I'm talking about this and realizing I don't have the answer to how to do this, I think it lays out a research and practice agenda for us for the future. To move to the next stage of our development, which is not only beyond patriarchy, but if I may say so, beyond matriarchy. To a more fully fleshed human perspective that does justice to the values that Marie-Louise so well defended in her speech, but also brings over to us people who are now viewing those values as somehow threatening to their interests and threatening to national interests. How do we answer that? How do we answer that? I'm really not sure. Maybe you'll be able to, in a question and answer period, maybe you'll have some suggestions on how we can answer that. I love this speech because it made me think. And I hope I speak for all of you saying that it helps us all to think and think new thoughts about an old problem that desperately needs to be solved. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rich. And let me just say again, Your Excellency, thank you so much for your talk. I think you really did give us a lot to think about. You really put out some provocative ways of thinking about gender and challenged, thinking about patriarchy and challenged us to think about what our roles are individually. Particularly, there was a challenge to the many students in the audience. Let me invite you to make comments or ask questions. We have microphones on either side of the room, so if you just raise your hand, I can recognize you, or someone with a microphone will make their way to you. Let me just ask, would you prefer to answer each question as it comes, or would you like to hear a few questions? Great, that's what we'll do. All right, so let's have a few questions. We have a question down here. Jay.
Madam President, I was very impressed with your presentation. I had a question on the LGBT rights. In this country, there have been cases where people have had deeply held religious beliefs as a reason for not wanting to print material for gays and lesbians or bake a cake, and they're being challenged in the courts because the people will say, I have nothing against gays and lesbians, but my religious belief, my relationship with God precludes me from supporting or promoting this ideology. Conversely, if you have the issue of female genital mutilation, when cases have come up in the United States, they'll interview the parents, and the parents say, we're not trying to harm our daughter. You don't understand our culture. we're trying to make her more valuable to someone that wants to marry her so she can lead a good life. I'm not saying I buy any of these arguments, but on a religious level, people have these beliefs. And I'm wondering in Malta, how do you reconcile when these cases come up? I mean, do you try and educate them, or is it just banned entirely? Or how does it work when you have these kind of violations that come up in Malta?
Thank you.
Some feminists and LGBT rights as well, but some feminists think that full equality for women should include the right to jump in the cockpit of a jet fighter, fly half the way around the world to incinerate your would-be sisters, to make the world safe for disposable diapers. Does this represent a challenge to patriarchy, or does it reinforce a patriarchal global order?
Hi. Comment question. So we in the field of conflict resolution, conflict analysis and resolution, are kind of used to being the other, say, of IR and other more traditional, in many ways patriarchal, kinds of thinking. And we fought very hard to make it more mainstream. So instead of us being an alternative, we should be part of the paradigm through which the world is understood. Some people like Dean Averick and others have fought very hard to make culture an integral part. Why is it, as we sit here at a university at the School for Conflict Analysis and Resolution, I know we offer gender classes, but why is gender not a core requirement, just like a few other things, a core lens through which we need to view things? Like, it seems like there's a tool in our hands. We're educating people who are, intelligent, good-hearted, good-willed, and probably think, we know enough about gender, but we don't necessarily, we know it's important, we don't necessarily have to take that course, or we have other choices. Shouldn't it be an integral lens, if not a course, an integral lens to what we teach here?
I'm afraid with regards to the last comment, I don't really can answer that. That's
Faculty answer.
But I really appreciate that sort of comment. I will repeat it many times to the people concerned wherever I am, in particular Malta. What about that route? Well, let me start with, first of all, thank you so much for these remarks, and I'll try to answer as best as I can. Well, with regards to LGBT rights and how one tackles the situation where the issue of religion comes in and culture, etc. But underlying all this is, there are human rights. So the issue of LGBTIQ is an issue of human rights. There's the issue of dignity, which is an intrinsic quality of our human rights. So it is not a matter of culture, religion. This is the way we look at them in Malta. These are human rights. And human rights which are universal. Human rights do not distinguish if I am Maltese or American. Human rights are universal for each and every one of us. And I think this is the way we must tackle any issues of gender, of gender. With regards to equality making women into soldiers or fighter pilots, I don't think there should be any hindrance if women would like to become fighter pilots. I would prefer it myself if there were no fighters in terms of aeroplanes or warfare. I would prefer that. But if there are these situations and women would like to contribute and they are able and capable to do it, why not? So it is not the issue of equality that makes people women into such situations. But I wanted to pass another comment, if you don't mind. I think there are much more very basic situations to the issue of equality and gender equality. For example, what about the gender pay gap? Gender pay gap, it's something which, it is not something which imagined, but it is also scientifically proved with research that has been done. This impacts women and impacts also the economy, impacts the family. It impacts in a way that it is so, it's multidimensional really, because there are so many dimensions to this. It impacts women at retirement age. Our life expectancy, women's life expectancy is even higher than men. That would impact even issues with regards to feminization of poverty, for example, at a retirement age. So these are so very basic, and we still talk about them. We still talk about them, we still discuss them. We still, you know, even though now we have research and studies that show us the issue of femicide, for example. Why can't we call the situation by its name? Why do we have to put such issues into the bigger pot and dilute them, not give them enough visibility? I think we must call the issues by their name. There are a number of situations that reflect that even though great progress has been done in many countries, but we are still speaking and discussing very basic situations that affect women in each and everyday life.
I think you're right, and issues that have been identified for quite a while, you know, that we return to and re-ask some of the same questions. There's a question way in the back.
Hello, good evening. As a multi-citizen, I must say how happy and proud I am to be here tonight and listen to the President of the Republic of Malta give this very interesting lecture while I'm here visiting George Mason University. But to come to the question, I'll refer to the situation in Malta at the moment where government is in the process of encouraging females to enter the political arena. Empower them, train them, encourage them, presumably through a system which itself could be, however, patriarchal and perpetrate that patriarchy as a system, because presumably it will be male politicians training and taking under their wing the new women elements in politics. I wonder whether that is something that can be counterproductive, and whether you think there are ways of avoiding a perpetuation of the patriarchal system. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. Claudine, right in the middle.
My name is Joe Monfield. First of all, I want to say I thought the speech was brilliant and fills a need for such an unambiguous articulation of a theme with moral power. And so I'm delighted to be here and delighted to hear you. So congratulations on that. I've had experience in a number of problem-solving workshops, starting with Egyptians, Israelis, and Palestinians over a six-year period, 5-day workshops a year. And it was always something that I, as part of the facilitating team, was so grateful to have a handful of women who would intervene at appropriate times when the men were acting like jerks, which is frankly, it's a psychophysiological phenomenon among the males. So I thought some of the most powerful information in dealing with some of the questions that Rich raised about how do you persuade people in the conflict analysis and resolution field, start with some of the data that you put up on the screen about the success of, say, corporate boards when you have a significant number of women in the directorships. And as you said also, the more you involve women in the dialogue for problem solving, the more likely you're going to get a meaningful peace, a meaningful agreement that will be sustainable for a longer period of time. You can't persuade men by saying, stop being a jerk. We don't respond well to that. But we do respond to data that indicates that a more inclusive role for women is going to lead to success that we're working toward. Again, thank you enormously for your presentation. We needed it.
Thank you. Take another question from the back. Thank you.
For a lot of young women, it's difficult to be something that they can't see. And as the second president of Malta, can you tell us about a woman or experience that really inspired you to first run for office?
So you spoke a bit about the inclusion of women in the peace-building process in a lot of different leadership roles. Can you speak a little bit about also trying to include those outside the gender binary in leadership development and in peace-building processes?
We'll hold off for a second with questions. You ready?
Let me tackle the first question by my fellow countrymen. I didn't realize there were Maltese in the audience. I'm so pleased, really. But you see how, even though we're so small, we're everywhere? Well, yes, there is this campaign, which is being called LEAD campaign. Well, it's not the only campaign. There are a number of other campaigns which will be actually launched very soon to encourage women to stand for Parliament at this point in time. Our female representation of Parliament is very meager. For myself, it saddens me because I've been in politics for now over 40 years. So looking back, I can see that little has been really, there hasn't been the progress that I and many women would have liked during these years. It's our female representation in Parliament, it is in the region of 11 to 13%. So the idea is to encourage more women to stand for Parliament, empowering women. Some words, or rather some words jar a bit to me, because we never say, well, let's empower men for Parliament. Men seem to be automatically empowered to stand for Parliament. But, and I think if we need to empower everybody. I've been in Parliament for about 16 years, and I've heard rubbish from men, quite some rubbish from men, speaking in Parliament. I can't say the same for women, because we were so few that really, even if there were any rubbish coming, there was any rubbish coming from women, you don't really notice it, because we were so few. But I can tell you, I have heard quite a lot of rubbish from men. In 16 years in Parliament and more than 40 years in politics. But what needs to be done really is we need to challenge the structures now and to change. We need a transformation. We cannot have Parliament starting off at 6 o'clock in the evening, ending up at 10 o'clock at night, a part-time Parliament, when it's always so easy for men to have their own full-time job, then go in the afternoon to Parliament, or in the evening to Parliament, till quite late at night and go home. For women, it doesn't work like that. We need, for example, we need Parliament to be a full-time Parliament, so that women do not have to think also of their full-time job, and we can see it work. That we have already some evidence of this, because our European Parliament is a full-time job. And there we can see women participation, Maltese women participation, I mean, really, I think there are more women than male, four women out of 6 European parliamentarians. So that is evidence that there is something very different. And the difference is that Parliament is full-time. So you don't have to think of having this full-time job for your income and then going to Parliament as if it was a hobby in the evening. We need to change this to be successful. I am convinced as soon as we change the structures and the way we do our parliamentary work in Malta, I'm convinced that there will be automatically more women that come forward to stand for Parliament. I'm truly convinced on this. Besides, we need to also infrastructurally need to put in some adjustments, because I always remember my time when I had my daughter. She was very young and I was in Parliament. For example, not having an nappy-changing facility. This might seem trivial to many of you, but it wasn't trivial for me. Or like a small nursery somewhere. It sounds trivial. It's not trivial at all when you have small kids. Okay, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to return to politics if we hadn't a nursery at the party headquarters. At the time, I wasn't in Parliament. The nursery made the whole difference for me, because I could take my child there within the precincts, and my mind was at rest. For example, a breastfeeding facility. Not every woman is comfortable to breastfeed in public. And we need to put such things in place. They might seem to be small, but I can tell you it makes a difference when you are rearing your children. And it's not just being a mother, it's also being a father. On the other hand, so the issue of these campaigns that are now coming to the fore in Malta to encourage more women to stand for Parliament, I see it in a holistic manner. Campaigns might give results, but at the end, we will need to have this whole transformation in terms of how we do our parliamentary work. Somebody asked, how can we persuade? My second question. I don't know if you can repeat the second remark, please. Someone. I took a note, but.
Joe's remark. About roles that women could play in, for instance, the dialogue and problem-solving workshops. Do women play? Can they play a role to move along such processes?
I remember now. Yes, I think this is one issue which I have touched upon in my contribution. Until we have a change of attitude towards the whole situation of negotiating for peace, etc., we will never know, except that we have already some research which shows that bringing women to the table to negotiate peace, to peace build, gives a longer span of life, one could say, to the peace issue. But really, we need to do something, because I call it the old recipe, that is the all-man style of negotiating. It's not really working. It's not working at all, because we look at the world and so many conflicts everywhere. So many conflicts. So really, and old conflicts. We have conflicts that go back decades, and decades have never solved. And until I do believe that we need to peace build from communities, and we need to bring the women community leaders in the equation to peace built through our communities, and that is for sure much more long-lasting. Maybe because I am very fond and a great believer of communities. It could be I always look at a bottom-up approach to things, but I do believe that we need to change the recipe, because really the old recipe is not working everywhere. So many conflicts everywhere. so many suffering.
Yeah, I think that those, your comments about the role of communities in bottom-up peace building, I think is so consistent with the ways in which many of us at ESCAR think about where solutions will come from. And the question about if there was someone who inspired you, if there was a woman who inspired you.
Yes, when I started in politics, and I was 16 at the time, still a student, so you might think, wasn't there anything else you can do in Malta at 16? But I got very excited in terms of doing something which well, I had started very early in my life, at 13, in community organizations. And then I realized very soon that if you want things to happen or to influence things, you need to be in politics. This was it. This was my turning point, really. Yes, there was this very first women president, Ms. Agata Barbara, whom I didn't know so well, though later in my life I got to know her. But she was the very first member of parliament in Malta. Next month we will have the 70th anniversary of our universal suffrage, at a time when it seemed, in today's context, it seemed like the Middle Ages in Malta, with all with many traditions and this culture of the church in Malta, saying all sorts of things. But Agata Barbara was very, very brave. She was the very first to stand for elections as soon as we got universal suffrage. And she was the very first minister, and she did a great job in education and culture and in labor legislation. So probably I started to admire her most much later, because I do not remember some of the things she did. But after realizing that she was behind such important legislation and change in Malta, that she was one of, I mean, she is one of the people I admire a lot, and really, she really must be commended, her efforts. And then she was the very first president as well of the Republic. In fact, I think, no, the second president, because the presidency is 43 years old in Malta, so I am the 9th president, she was the 3rd president, and the very first woman president.
There was another question about gender minorities and leadership.
Yes.
And I think that would be one that it would be great for you to speak to, because of the things that the foundation has done.
Yes, we are very proud of what has been happening these last couple of years in Malta with this great change in legislation and the many now rights that are truly and effectively available for LGBTIQ communities. Obviously, we still need to work. I mean, we can't really rest our minds, because obviously there needs also to be, we need to further educate, and this has to come from our education system. In fact, lately, the President's Foundation for the Wellbeing of Society, under the leadership of Dr. Roots, we have this very important video, I call it. This video, which was called "Our Children Are All Right," brought to the fore a very important aspect of LGBTIQ rights, the issue of children in same-sex families. And this video displays, or rather gave, the opportunity to a number of same-sex families, the parents, speaking about sharing their narratives, really, and their children speaking up. And so this was, I would say, a breakthrough, because there was some controversy when civil union was legislated and later marriage, due to adoptions, you know, etc. I think not just adoptions, but even children. So this has helped a bit also to educate, and we hope that we will have further opportunity to continue to help out with the education, so that we can now also change. We have this culture change which is needed, so that it is not just legislation, but also the culture change, so that everybody will feel valued and given the proper dignity and respect in Malta.
I'm so pleased that you made that last point about the relationship between legislating significant social change and then the work that needs to happen around that and afterwards as people adjust to whether it's a new discourse of rights or another major legal initiative. Any other last? Oh, there are many. We'll just take a couple more. I also want to say, as we get a microphone to you, make the okay. I just want to say that the film that's been mentioned is really quite a beautiful, really quite a wonderful film.
Your Excellency, I have a question. First off, my name's Dave Norman. I'm an employee of the U.S. government. So my question is, basically, I believe that there will always be institutions that will be patriarchal, such as the church. So I was wondering if you could give me a story about your time in your administration when you have worked with a patriarchal institution, been forced to, you know, like cooperation.
I'm sorry, I'm not getting.
I use the church as an example.
Yes, because
How do you deal with it when you have to confront?
Well, I'm very straightforward. I can tell you. I'm very straightforward, but yes, I don't think we will change the church but I do hope that the church, there is a certain amount of one could say opening access, but obviously I don't think we will change some different routes. Okay, route is reminding me of one very particular experience of mine, going back to like when I was 17 years, 18 years. I started working in the Central Statistics Office of Malta at the time. And every couple of years there was this, this is an experience that yes, you can bring change. And there was this, every couple of years, there was this census of agriculture, which was conducted in Malta by bringing in the farmers, and they are asked questions and then writing the answers, analyzed. Well, it was very primitive the way things were done. And some of my colleagues, some of my female colleagues were grumbling and complaining to me that they could not attend for this census of agriculture. They used to get some extra money. That was the reason and the interest that they wanted to go, because they were women. And well, I was encouraging them to stand up and speak about it. I wasn't interested to go on about to waste 4 Sundays going to this sort of affair. But anyway, they kept on complaining, and then I decided to speak up for them. I became a de facto trade union. I went to the principal's office, who was one of these people that everybody was very afraid of him, but I decided to go. And I asked him why women could not attend for this agricultural consensus. And he told me, listen, don't start causing me headaches. I told him, but it's not fair, it's unjust. We are both men and women in this department, sort of, we should, anyway. He decided to give it a chance. Then I realized, well, then I was told that women were not allowed to go because there were some questions on how the cow is fertilized, if it's by artificial means or else through by the bull. Not to, this was it, not to embarrass the farmers, but I had the experience because then I had to go for only one of these exercises, and it's true. Yeah, I remember it so clearly in my mind, even though it's a couple of decades ago now. More than a couple of decades, I realize. And yes, the farmers were very embarrassed when you asked them if it is by artificial means or by the wood. But we changed that, we changed that. And it was a time when not only women were not treated equally, but also a time where you had to be a subdued person and accept anything that comes from the top, You don't stand up and say what needs to be said. So I don't know about the church, but I still speak my mind to the proper people.
Maybe we'll just take one last question because we do have some time in the reception to talk some more. So Claudine, I think, is with someone who can ask a good last question.
Madam President, thank you very much for your speech. I thought it was great. The one thing I wanted to ask is, we noticed that the studies definitely show that there's a gender gap in terms of pay, but some of the studies have also shown is that many of those gaps are related to women's asking for increases in things like that. And my question is, how do we target parents and mothers to encourage their daughters to not necessarily behave more like men, but to be more assertive in the workplace? Because I think what we are finding in some of the studies is that women culturally are reinforcing some of these kind of societal norms, saying, be more passive, less aggressive. How can we target them? How can we do more outreach to families, women, to say, hey, don't encourage your sons to be better people. Encourage your daughters to be more assertive and more aggressive. I mean, not aggressive, but similar to aggressive. How can we do that, and what are you doing in Malta to maybe change the societal thinking?
I am a believer of education. I mean, education is key. We need to have the proper educational approach to this, through schools in particular. If a woman is assertive, she will be called aggressive, I can tell you. But a man who is assertive really is so responsible and good at it, It's like that. I've passed through this so many times in my life. Being assertive, many a time you're labeled that you are aggressive. But men can be very assertive. So we need to change the attitude, because yes, we really are born in a patriarchal culture, really. We need to break those circles and stand up. But you mentioned mothers and girls. Let me take the example in my own country. The university population of the University of Malta. Susan, you must know. Professor Rubenstein must know about this. Well, and Julie, we have more women at our university than men. So at the end of each year, there are more women graduates than men graduates. So really, in terms of education, one can say that we're moving ahead. But then it's the issue of culture. We need when I say education, not just formal education, but we need information. We need, for example, with regards to this gender pay gap, we started it off last March. Susan, were you there? Were you there in March?
Not this past.
Okay. But last March we started speaking about the gender gap. And for example, there's Iceland who have legislated on the gender gap. So it is not simply it is not a perception. It's real. They wouldn't have. For example, I've started hearing some reasons why the gender gap. Because in Malta we have had this phenomenon. Since first of all, there has been a great increase of women into the workforce these last years. And now we can see that within 2 years, from 2014 to 2016, there has been an increase in the gender pay gap. And some people were telling me, but this is because of more women in the workforce. Some others told me, but this is with regards to the caring profession, or rather the low-income jobs. I don't think so. I don't think so. But we need to research on it. We need to research to get to the bottom of it, because at this point in time we only have international research, but we need a national research to understand exactly what is happening in this regard, because you cannot ignore 6 percentage points increase in 2 years. And if it is truly tied to more women are in the workforce, it will get even worse, because this is what we are pushing and targeting, that more and more women will get into the workforce. So we need to do something now. That's why we are putting some pressure on it. We have brought together through my foundation, we have brought together all women organizations on the same platform. And so we are working on these issues with a common approach. We hope that we can manage to see deeply what is wrong with that.
Yeah, I think you're pointing us toward more education and also
more education
more research.
And campaigning and bringing things to the fore. Because I am convinced that most women in Malta would not understand this issue of gender pay gap. And they are the people that actually are touching it in each and every day of their lives. So we need to bring these issues to the fore so that people will get the information and get also educated in the process.
It's not just in Malta, I think, that people have not understood the gender pay gap and need more attention to that. Absolutely here.
It's the same, for example, with femicide. We have seen an increase of femicide. But nobody says femicide. Nobody says it. So once you don't give visibility to the issue, it's lost completely. And I think we should call the issue by its name and to give it visibility. I think that is one step to start educating by giving information, by giving information, and people will become aware, and people will start asking, demanding, and if the information is there, get educated in the process.
Thank you so much. I think the real lesson of a provocative talk is that it leaves many of us still wanting to put our hands up with more questions. But I will turn it now to Dean Averick.
Thank you. Madam President, Your Excellency, thank you so much for such a wonderful and thought-provoking talk. And in a moment, we will move across the hall for the reception. First, briefly, there are so many people to thank tonight. I want to thank all of the folks who made this possible: university events, Arlington events, GMU TV, GMU police, SCAR staff, and our volunteers this evening. I especially want to thank Ashley Joyner. Ashley, where are you? Are you here? She's probably out running. So, okay. I want to thank Ashley Joyner. I, of course, also want to thank our colleagues, Vice President Marks, for your remarks, my colleague and friend Rich Rubenstein for your comments, bringing it all back home, right? Was I listening to you? Were you bringing it all back home? And of course, I want to thank Professor Hirsch in her inaugural event as Lynch Professor. I trust there'll be so many of these. We're deeply grateful to you, and My understanding is, may I have the envelope, please, that we have a small token of our appreciation. To give you. It's a medium token of our appreciation. To give you to take back to Malta.